Oh, okay. See, nothing.
Okay, because it was showing live, I saw
okay,
it.
it is showing. See, I'm not seeing it there. I don't know why. I did that once before where I got the one picture, and so that's,
Okay.
I just
I'll step on watching once we get.
Okay.
Welcome everyone to the July 17th board meeting for the Ames Community School District. I have a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Rosser, seconded by Rasmussen. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm on the street, yeah.
Nay. Passes 6-0. I'll take approval of the read the mission statement. Director Talbot, if you'll read the mission statement, please.
The mission of the Ames Community Schools is to ensure that all learners develop the knowledge, skills, attitudes, values, and personal esteem necessary to grow in and shape a changing society.
Thank you. We will move on to discussion items. Residents of the district, students attending the district, parents or guardians of students attending the district, and district staff members may address the board about any topic relevant to the district, whether on the current agenda or not. Those who wish to speak must sign up at the beginning of the meeting. Speaker participation is limited to 3 minutes once per item. The views and opinions of citizens addressing the board do not necessarily reflect those of the board, district administration, or staff. Speakers are to remember that Iowa law prohibits the board from discussing specific employees, students, or their performance. Student speakers will state their name and school. Others will state their name and address. And we're going to start with the first discussion item, the Iowa Reading Research Center grant. Dr. Ross.
Good evening. I'm currently in the process of working with the Iowa Reading Research Center on a grant, and so this information is really just to make the board aware in accordance with board policy, because really we just try to make the board aware, because at some point in time we'll come and ask for approval of that grant should we be awarded. So the purpose of the grant is to continue our collaboration with the Iowa Reading Research Center as we begin to implement foundations in grades K through 2 throughout the district. During the pilot last year, the IRRC made accommodations in their own budget to provide Ames with the support for evaluating the pilot materials. By joining with the IRC in this grant, the Ames schools would have continued support beyond the monitoring of the fidelity, or to include the fidelity of the implementation of foundations beyond the capacity of our current staffing. The grant is through the Institute for Educational Sciences, or the IES, which we all speak in acronyms in this organization. So the IRC is based out of the University of Iowa, and all grant applications are going to have the University of Iowa in the documentation. So at some point in time, should we be awarded this grant, you'll see the University of Iowa noted, since they host the Iowa Reading Research Center. Ames then would be the subgrantee should we be awarded. Our portion of the grant addresses data collection, including classroom walkthrough data, quick phonics screener, which is the student piece that we used with the grant last year, and so we have baseline data from the grant, And then the time to review and analyze these data outside of contract time, because this is going to be over and beyond the scope of most of our professional time. The data collection will include disaggregating data by subgroups, by buildings, and other ways that will inform our work throughout the year and through a 2-year implementation process with the Iowa Reading Research Center. Grant also requires that we share our results with others through the IES annual conference and also one other conference with colleagues. So the costs of those presentations are built into the costs of the grant. The timeline on this grant is very quick. Dr. Reed reached out to me at the end of June, and we've been scrambling to put the pieces together since then. So we have to have the initial pieces to the University of Iowa Grant Department later this week, and that needs to be submitted to the IES by August 4th. The grant, however, award is for January 1st, 2018, and runs through December 31st, 2019, so that's that 2-year span. Whether or not we receive the grant, however, Dr. Reed has committed some of her resources at the IRC for at least 1 year to help us with the implementation of foundations. Clearly, the collaboration with the IRC has been beneficial with the pilot, but also now extends into the benefits of working with them through the implementation process. So I just wanted to make the board aware and see if you had any questions as we try to wrap up the grant writing process here this week.
I have 2. So what's the scope in terms of dollars that we're trying to claim? And secondly, how competitive are there 20 grant applicants for 2 grants? Do you have any sort of sense?
I don't have any sense in terms of the competition. That piece I'm just totally unaware of, and in my conversations with Dr. Reed, that's not something that's come up. However, I have some hope that with her experience writing for IES and the University of Iowa's grant writer, I think we're in pretty good shape that way because they've been very particular about the pieces and things have been sent back for revisions because of that. So I think that their knowledge of the grant writing process will serve us well in that regard. And in terms of the scope of the funds, it's a $250,000 grant that we're going for. We here in Ames would get about $32,000 of that. They scoop off a part for their administrative services right from the top at the University of Iowa, which is typical. And then the services of the IRC staff are covered largely because they're going to have more transportation costs and software and analysis costs than we are. We will pick up a fraction of that. Some of my costs for my salary and part of Dan's costs for his salary will be included in some of that grant writing if it comes together.
Okay.
Partnership has been advantageous so far. You've got 10 days. Are you comfortable with it, whatever information they need from you that you can get it? Is there anything we can do? Do you need us to assist in any way?
I appreciate that, but I think we're in pretty good shape right now. We've had some questions, some details that we've been scrambling and getting help with from our business department. But aside from that, I think we're in pretty good shape. I think I've got most of my pieces at least drafted and into them for the first draft, and then we'll just check and double check here this week. So a little bit of juggling, but I think we can get it done.
With the assessment part of that, is there any feel for if would there be a change in assessments that we have to give to the kids in there? Would it be more time, less time? Any feel for that yet?
The only thing that we'll be doing differently right now is adding the QPS as a routine piece of our assessment data, and that's a piece that we used last year during the reading pilot. So it's just continuing that and then expanding it into all classes, not just those that were involved in the pilot. So the other aspect of that we're looking at is, in order not to lose instructional time, how do we best administer between the FAST, QPS, and benchmarking so that we don't keep pulling teachers out and having substitutes in the classroom. And we are exploring with Dr. Reed the possibility of having Iowa State students, again, administer the QPS like we did last year and just pay them an hourly rate to give us a hand with that. And we can build that into the grant or into some of our professional funds from the C&I account.
Okay.
How sustainable would be some of these additions, assuming we were to get the grant and it's only for a finite period?
The QPS is really the only addition, and we cannot write that into the grant itself because it's for implementation, so we have to be very particular about how we write, just so that we don't expand beyond the scope of the project. But with QPS, we really want to see if our teachers feel like that gives them additional data for reading instruction. Plus, there are going to be some additional assessments with foundations implementation. So we'll kind of tease that out, but the QPS gives us some growth data over time, and that's why Dr. Reed suggested that be an ongoing part of our implementation process. So as far as sustainability, I think so. If we drop QPS because we find that there's duplication of information with foundations data and assessment data, we can do that in year 3.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Question from the public?
Yeah, I'm going to. And are there any questions from the public or comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the next discussion item, the SIAC goal recommendations. Dan Andrews.
Okay, I think I have it all set up now. Good evening. Tonight we're going to be presenting the goal recommendations from the May 25th meeting of the School Improvement Advisory Committee, known as SIAC. SIAC is required to meet at least annually by Iowa code. Its membership is comprised of students, parents, community members, teachers, administrators, and members of the school board. The committee must receive an update about bullying and harassment, as well as review data and make goal recommendations to the board of directors. Tonight's presentation will focus on these goals. The process leading up to setting these goals has 3 basic steps. First, a content team from reading, mathematics, and science looks at and analyzes the current Iowa assessment data for their content area for grades 3 through 11. The content team narrows the focus of our data analysis to a few grade levels and makes a goal recommendation to SIAC. Secondly, SIAC meets to discuss, analyze, and finally make a goal recommendation to you, the board of directors, in each of the 3 subjects. The third step is to the presentation to and hopefully approval of these goals by the school board. While we strive for improvement in every subject at every grade level, the goals we ultimately recommend focus on a single grade level for each subject area. Tonight we'll be sharing information by subject. We'll briefly share our performance on last year's goal, followed by this year's goal recommendation. Finally, we'll be presenting an additional goal SIAC has recommended around the achievement gap between racial and ethnic groups. Let's begin with reading. Last year, the goal was set to improve proficiency of 7th grade students to higher than 82.19%. Last year's 7th graders improved to 82.49%. While for practical purposes, this would not be considered a change, it is technically an improvement meeting the goal. This year's reading goal follows the same cohort of students. In 2016-17, 82.49% of our 7th grade students were proficient in reading. In In 2017-18, more than 82.49% of our 8th grade students will be proficient in reading. Again, this is the same cohort of students, so we're the same simple cohort. So we're watching the same group of students, we're taking into account, not taking into account who moves in, who moves out. It's just that particular grade level. Moving on to mathematics, our 2016-17 goal focused on incoming freshmen. Last year's 9th graders met the goal by improving from 81.41% to 84.11%. This year, the content team and SIAC recommended following the incoming 6th grade students by increasing their proficiency beyond 83.49%. The goal reads, in 2016-17, 83.49% of our 5th grade students were proficient in mathematics. In 2017-18, more than 83.49% of our 6th grade students will be proficient in mathematics. The final subject area to be addressed this evening will be science. Last year, our science goal, like our reading goal, focused on 7th grade. In science, last year's 7th grader saw a 0.5 percentage point decline in the percent proficient. This is, again, for practical purposes, is not a change. However, we technically did not meet this goal. Unlike in reading and math, which had unanimous support from the table groups at SIAC, science did not. The recommended goal focuses on 7th grade, but a different cohort of students. An additional consideration for this goal was that last year's 6th grade students have had the most exposure to the new science standards. The goal recommendation for 2017-18 is, in 2016-17, 85.34% of our 6th grade students were proficient in science. In 2017-18, more than 85.34% of our students will be proficient in science. The other grade level goal that was discussed in depth was looking at 9th to 10th grade students. The rationale of the group that preferred this goal to the recommended goal included the analysis of cross-sectional data at 10th grade, which shows a steady decline over the past few years, and the consideration of this alternative goal would place a goal at Ames High School, rather than all 3 at Ames Middle School. It should be noted that the discussion of these goals was never about either goal not being appropriate, but rather which goal was the most appropriate to be presented to you. Either would be appropriate and would have data to support a recommendation. In 2016, the Iowa School Report Card was updated to include a Closing the Gap achievement score, specifically focusing on racial and ethnic minorities. The result of this score raised both internal and external concerns about the underperformance of different racial and ethnic groups of our students. This year, SIAC was provided additional information about the performance of each federally reported racial and ethnic group on the Iowa assessments by grade level. These results were especially alarming for our Black or African American students. After being provided with some preliminary information about a professional development plan being developed with Iowa State University to address cultural competency beginning in 2017, SIAC recommended that we create a goal using the following rationale to address the achievement gap. Based on our current professional development planning, the goal should be a district level goal and not target a specific grade level as the other goals you've seen already do. Each subject should have its own goal rather than compressing subjects together. The Iowa School Report Card compresses all 2 years worth of data and compresses reading and math together to give a final sort of just lump score. So we're going to separate those out and look at each one by subject. Because this type of goal has not been written in Ames before, it should still be written as an improvement style goal rather than saying we're going to set a specific percentage target. Finally, because of the data, SIAC recommended that this goal specifically address Black or African American students. We're recommending a style that focuses on improving the percent proficient of Black or African American students rather than specifically focusing on the gap between Black or African American students and non-Black or African American students. As we were writing and researching these goals, it became apparent that it would be possible to meet a gap-focused goal not by improving the scores of Black or African American students, but by not having the non-Black or African American students' proficiency decrease. We are not suggesting that this would be an appropriate strategy to meet this goal, or that it would be acceptable to see any student or group of students not improve. We are simply inferring from the conversation at SIAC, the focus of this goal needs to be improving the proficiency of our Black or African American students. What we're going to look at now is going to be a slide of the data, followed by two goals. The top goal will be the recommended goal. The second will be the gap analysis goal. So in last year, our Black or African American students in reading were 62.62% proficient. Non-Black or African American students were 90.73% proficient. A gap between those two groups was 28.11 percentage points. Our recommended goal is that in 2016-17, 62.62% of our Black or African American students were proficient in reading. In 2017-18, more than 62.62% of our Black or African American students will be proficient in reading. The gap focus goal would read, in 2016-17, a 28.11 percentage point gap existed between Black or African American students and non-Black or African American students. In 2017-18, there will be less of a gap in reading. In mathematics, Black or African American students were 57.75% proficient. That's spanning all three through 11th grade. Non-Black or African American students were 91.66% proficient. The gap was 33.91 percentage points. Again, our recommended goal is in 2016-17, 57.75% of our Black or African American students were proficient in math. In 2017-18, more than 57.75% of our Black or African American students will be proficient in mathematics. The gap focus goal would read, in 2016-17, a 33.91 percentage point gap existed between Black or African American students and non-Black or African American students. In 2017-18, there will be less of a gap in mathematics proficiency. And in science, Black or African American students were 57.01% proficient. Non-Black or African American were 90.74% proficient. A gap of 33.73 percentage points existed between the two groups. Our recommended goal reads, in 2016-17, 57.01% of our Black or African American students were proficient in science. In 2017-18, more than 57.01% of our Black or African American students will be proficient in science. The gap focused goal would read, in 2016-17, a 33.91 percentage point gap existed between Black or African American students and non-Black or African American students. In 2017-18, there will be less of a gap in science proficiency. At this point, I've thrown a lot of stuff at you pretty fast, so we would open it up for questions, and we'll go from there.
So when you said that the number was essentially the same because it was only a few decimal points, statistically speaking, what's material? In other words, keeping track of all these fractions is amazing, but is it useful, and does it need to be a percent or two change to have it be material?
I haven't run the statistics specifically to see what a year-to-year difference would be. The way I generally speak about it in terms of SIAC is that classes are around 300, a little bit more, but if we treat 300 as a class size, 3 students equals 1 percentage point. So when we're talking, I usually say if it's more than 1%, if we can move more, 3 students or more, that's worth saying we probably made an improvement there in that. When we're seeing less than a percentage point, we're talking, in these two cases, probably the difference between 1 student. The difference over class sizes and move-ins, move-outs, and all of those things affects those numbers. But generally, we're talking about 3 students making up 1 percentage point.
Right, so subsequent to that, with your SIAC discussions, is there any discussion to say, hey, we understand the more than goal. However, if that's not statistically significant, is there ever discussion to say, you know what, let's make it a point more. Let's make it something more than just more than, because more than might not be material.
Challenging enough? Yeah, we have that conversation almost every year. This format is the way that we submit them to the state in terms of this. If we can set a goal higher than more than. We can set it however we want. If you set it higher than the more than, you're reporting back that the state is, and you only make a small percentage growth, the state will come back and tell us you did not meet your goal. There is no sanction for not meeting your goal.
There's no so what, right?
Right, yeah.
Not currently anyway.
Mm-hmm. The part of the question we always wrestle with on that same point is how worthwhile is this particular assessment in terms of changing our instruction when we're talking Iowa assessment. So we have both of those conversations almost every year when we have this conversation.
I'm sure the committee's views reflect that on my own. With regards to the disparity gap and the goals that were set there, while I want to see it improve, as the goal says, I personally would like to see some substantial gains there. You know, we've got students in the 50 percentile, 60 percentile range, and that's just not cutting it. So I'm glad that we've got a goal now targeting that specifically. I'm glad that the goal obviously shows that we want improvement, but the challenge beyond the goal is let's start seeing some statistical increases there.
I have a couple of comments and questions. First of all, I'd like to say I'm pleased. I'm really, really thankful that the CIAC committee really focused on some of the, and really dug deep into these numbers. But my follow-up questions are this, and whether you know, Andrew or Dan, or whether Dr. Ross want to address them. Goals are great, and even, you know, going a little bit more than what we've accomplished in the past. And yes, I agree with you. We need to see some substantial gains in our African American students and Hispanic students as well. But give me some examples of how are we going to accomplish meeting those goals? Just some examples, please.
We can't yet because that's part of our retreat planning here on August 1 and 2. So what we'll do is take the SIAC goals to the principals, to the directors, and to our 30-member administrative team, and start breaking those down into what happens at each building and then what support do they need from us. Because most of the things that we're talking about instructionally, our role in the C&I department is to support those folks, and they are actually going to build their building professional development plans around it.
Well, I understand they will identify some specific goals at your retreat, but just give me an example of some of the things they'll consider.
Well, I would tell you that one of the things that we really need to up is our response to intervention, or MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, because that really takes each individual student where they are and moves them forward. And that's something that we're still working to strengthen, but we've got a long ways to go on that. So that's something that I would anticipate we're going to see a lot of. And then what other interventions can we provide for each and every student who needs that level of support? So it's a student by student breakdown, but then we have to make sure we have the assessments in place to get the data that we need to take that student up those notches they need to move in order to be successful overall.
I think some of that data is putting some pressure on Dr. Jones again here, because we're really looking at the success program at the elementary level. We're looking at success nights and the way families can provide support at home. The ALP services at both the middle school and the high school are very important here. And I know that we have put tutorial services in place at the middle school. We got the additional instructional time at the elementary. We got the plus period at the high school. What I've noticed is I'm not certain that we have any information or any data that says that those things are working well for us. But those are some things that we certainly have been doing and need to do a better job. And I like what Dr. Ross just said, the real basis here is the multi-tiered system of supports. And are we doing that with integrity and doing it the right way?
Yeah.
We have to make sure, I think, Director Rosser, your question is really a good one. And in my mind, the thing that gets me is that we have to make sure that all students are getting the same education. And unless we have the data and we have the ability to observe and watch it, I'm not convinced.
Sure.
Until
And I was just going to follow up with the multi-tier system of supports. Be a little more specific of, I mean, we all know what that is, but not everybody watching on TV or in the audience do know specifically. When a student is taken into that system, what are some of the supports that are offered to them?
Actually, every student in the district is
Right.
part of that system because it starts off with Tier 1, where it's general instruction in the classroom, so everybody gets that. But if I'm getting that instruction at Tier 1, but it's not clicking, it's not catching on, then I get some additional re-instruction still in Tier 1, and that's part of the misunderstanding a lot of times is you don't automatically go from Tier 1 to Tier 2, but there's re-instruction at Tier 1. But if that's still not locking in for me, then my teacher's going to start some interventions at Tier 2. Tier 2 interventions can take place in the classroom still with the general ed teacher. It might be success support. It might actually be an EA who is doing some of our protocols. Our reading protocols, for example, are very scripted. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have an educational degree to have that level of support. And then Tier 2 could also be, I believe, success. But Tier 3, generally speaking, is a student moving into special education services and is entitled. Doesn't always happen that way, but each tier gets progressively more stringent with the additional support that the student receives. And our outcome really ultimately is to get the kids back into Tier 1, catch them up, get them that support so that they can get back into the Tier 1 strands so that they're not getting all that extra support, because it does take additional resources and it also takes time that might be lost someplace else. That's why at the elementary, middle, and high school levels, our principals have built into their master schedule that additional instruction time so that they're not losing core instruction while they're being pulled out for additional support services.
So with this goal of, and I'm going to call it a micro focus of a goal of on students that are represented in the achievement gap, to really focus on those students, they're going to be available to them even more intensive services in this particular area possibly.
I would say that probably more targeted,
Right.
Because the services probably aren't going to change substantially, but we're going to have to look at each child separately and make sure that they're getting that support in a timely fashion and not waiting till they really fall out in the data.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're
And you answered my question, follow-up question regarding resources. That's an ongoing thing, but we know resources are there for that type of thing. But please come to the board and let us know if you need more resources on those, and we'll
We pretty
find
much have in place what we can afford right now,
I know.
but we're always working to refine it, though. And I think that that's the important thing, because the question has come up, are we using the best screeners that we can for reading and for math? And so we're always looking for a better answer than what we've got. That's that continuous improvement mindset of the district.
My challenge to you, Dr. Ross, and to the administrative team is when you do have your get-together at the retreat, think about next year's budget and what resources that maybe aren't available right now, be it more aides in the classroom from the human aspect or other types of resources might be a benefit going forward, and then challenge your staff as the year goes on to also think about that, and then maybe come back to the board before we do our budget talk next spring and identify some of those things so that we can start trying to manipulate that budget in a way that benefits us going forward.
Okay.
Kind of hopeful that the family and student advocates at the middle school and the high school help provide some of those services that will make a difference for kids. There's a sense that there are families who need help but don't know where to get it, and we're hopeful that our advocates will be able to do that. That will make a difference.
I want to
Will
commend
make a difference, my last statement.
I want to commend you guys for leading us through this. I've been at the SIAC meetings every year since being here, and I've gone on record as saying that I think it is one of the most meaningless meetings that board members or community members or teachers are put through, because it's just meeting a state mandate. Been through it at 2 other school districts back, similar process in my teaching days. Not quite exactly the same thing, but pretty dang close. And first time ever that somebody brought something that actually is trying to do something meaningful here, and the fact that you didn't take the easy way out by just going with that second goal on the achievement gap part and just saying that you're going to close the gap, that you went with the harder one, that you're actually going to increase proficiency. I appreciate everything you've done. So good step in the right direction, and let's just keep it going from that standpoint.
Yeah, credit where credit is due. It was really Dan's brainchild about how to take that and bring it up a couple of notches in light of the conversations we've been having. So it is his brainchild, but coming into implementation takes the whole team. So thank you.
Yep.
I do want to point out, just in reference to one of the comments Director Rosser made, that when we looked at the data, it was very clear that this was specific to our African American and Black students falling out this way. Statistically, I did run the statistics comparing subgroups, and it's consistently our African American students falling out. There's a few pocketed grade levels where we see Hispanics a little lower, but in the upper grades, they're even significantly above African American students. So that's why this is specifically targeted that way.
Right.
Yeah, I'll echo Director Rasmussen. It definitely, this year felt different than last year with good meaning. And Director Briggs, I share your concern that we just want the improvement. I'm pleased that we want the improvement and not the gap, from the standpoint that is determined then by what the other group does. So I appreciate the pointedness on that. And I think that, I guess the thing I would challenge us as a district, knowing that the state doesn't necessarily, while we turn this in and this will come back for board approval at our next meeting, I would challenge us to figure out how do we keep ourselves accountable to this, to making sure that we're moving forward and seeing those improvements where we know those improvements need to take place. So thank you for your work on this. Are there any other questions from the board?
I have a hard time, Dan, with the statistics. I don't like to talk about specific ethnicity or races, because some of the groups are so small you're identifying the students. But when we have groups that are that small, how can you have confidence that one person not meeting the goal hasn't made the entire program look like a failure?
In this particular case, the subgroups are large enough that we can, all of the subgroups have more than 30 that we're talking about in this particular goal. The way we've written it, we have compressed 3 through 11th grade across the district. So we have a fairly substantial subgroup in each of those, I'm not going to say in each of them, Native American and Alaskan Natives and Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians as the 2 subgroups. We do not have enough to make 10, even compressing all of those groups. So those fall out of the data set. All of the other subgroups have large enough populations that we can work with them and do those things.
Then the second is a question. If a car's not operating, you have to identify whether it's electricity, air, or gasoline. I mean, if you just go out with a wrench and start working on the car, how do you know you're ever going to solve the problem? So the question is, we can sure establish these goals, but then how does the cause become identified? And is the cause identified nationally? Has someone actually sat down and compared Ames to other districts around the United States and decided whether or not our cause is the same cause as Atlanta, Georgia?
I would say we have not done that. However, we periodically look at ourselves against other districts particularly in the central Iowa area, larger districts. And so we know that we're in the same ballpark for the most part. We're not substantially different when we've looked in the past. I don't know that we've done that this year. I don't know that we've done it the past 2 years. Because when we do look, we are running neck and neck with other districts for the most part. All of us have ebbs and flows in terms of our data coming and going. We've had some spikes in our data where we're looking like, oh, we're making some really good progress, but the sustainability is not there. So in terms of cause, it really comes down to a case-by-case basis with each child. We can't say that everybody in a particular subgroup has the same cause behind them. So that's where we're trying to add additional resources so that we're treating the whole child. And sometimes, in the case of a particular family in one of our elementaries, the principal brought in the...
DHS?
Nope. The Story County Attorney's Office. And she pulled in other resources. And what ended up happening there, because it was an attendance issue, which was resulting in a student achievement issue, a learning issue, but instead they provided the parent with a mentor to help with some of her parenting skills. So that being said, we're looking at not only what's happening academically, but also looking at the child as a whole person and the family as part of the support system.
Additionally, I might add that when I'm looking at this data, lots of questions get asked. Is this a socioeconomic issue? Is this a community issue? Where does this fall? And this particular issue of achievement gap is, I call it like I might be a dork, that I call it like a 20-sided die. And I can affect this one side of the die in terms of the school, where these other pieces all affect the way that rolls and plays in the community and in the lives of each of those kids. What I can say by looking at this data is that there is something in the way that our instruction or the way that students are walking into the building from that particular ethnicity that is making it more difficult for them to access what we're teaching than any other subgroup. I can't tell you what that is. I can't tell you where it's coming from. I can't tell you even if after all of these steps will make a difference, but we have to try. And that's what I think this goal is attempting to do and where we're attempting to go as we work on our professional development plan moving forward.
I appreciate you sharing that, because that was shared at one of our meetings. I don't know that I was with you, and that was very telling information for us in terms of we've got to try this, because we do, the way you say, the way the dice looks and the way that it's rolling, it's potentially telling us something. So, any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And if we have any questions or comments from the public, come on up. You can just give your name because I've got your address up here. So.
Oops. Destroying the table while I'm up here. Sorry. My name is Gail Seiler, and I just have a couple comments that I'd like to make. 420 Briarwood Place. I think it's important that, I think many of the questions and comments that the board offered were really helpful and insightful in response to the presentation. I think it is important to think about statistical significance to some extent, and to recognize that just because there's an increase doesn't mean there's been real change. And while statistical significance is important, and that was a question I was going to ask Dan, we need to think beyond that and think about what's really changing. Dan's comment about the multi-sided die and much of that is beyond the control of the school is a really important point. That I think the focus needs to be not just on services provided because of a student's SES or other out-of-school factors, but to really think about what's going on in the schools. Like he said, something's happening when African American students walk into the schools each day. Something's happening, and that's what needs to be figured out, and that's what needs to be addressed. It's not saying those other things aren't important. There's many, many factors, but some of those are out of the school's control. But you do control what that student's experiences in the halls, in the classrooms, in the cafeteria, when they walk in the door, and that's something that, that needs to be thought about. I also would like to see more specific targets, like Mr. Briggs mentioned, that greater than or more than is good, but I would like to see some specific numbers, maybe over a longer term. Maybe it's not that the SIAC does that. I noticed in the presentation that there was a recommendation that asking the Teaching and Learning Committee to write a goal that would close the achievement gap. I would encourage the Teaching and Learning Committee, and we've talked about that in other conversations, to take that up, because I think that could be more specific, or it could be over multiple years, say goals that were spread over 3 years with incremental change, with increases and real change each year. I think that would also, doing something like that would also provide important visibility to this issue that I think the community would be heartened to see, and I think for students and teachers also it would be really meaningful to prioritize it in that way. Let me see if I'm also really happy on behalf of our group, the Ames Youth and School Action Team, to see that SIAC has kind of taken on this racial disparities issue in achievement, because that's, from what I hear about this committee, it's not something that was done by that committee in the past, so I really applaud them bringing it to the fore like this, and we're grateful for that. A last thing is that in thinking about how teaching can be done differently, how school climates can be approached differently, I just want to remind you that there are people in the School of Ed here at ISU with expertise in culturally relevant pedagogy, particularly in science and math. So I encourage you to take advantage of that, because like I think it was Director Talbot said, if you don't know what the problem is, trying different things isn't really going to be effective. But if you understand that one of the problems, I don't like to call it a problem, but one of the things that could be addressed is the way teaching is done and ways that it can be made more culturally relevant. There's a lot known about that, and there are people with expertise in that area. So, thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Hello, my name is Monique Binken. I'm at 4810 Dover Drive. I hadn't planned to speak today. I might have dressed a little nicer. I know we're being recorded. So I actually just wanted to speak about what I just heard. So I'm really grateful that the district is making intentional efforts to address the achievement gap. I have 2 children, my husband and I, we have 2 children in the district. They're at Sawyer Elementary. They are students of color. I'm a person of color, and I am very much invested in this issue. I'm actually speaking to you as a researcher. I'm an assistant professor at Iowa State University, and what I heard was extremely concerning because it didn't seem to reflect best practices in terms of how you approach statistical solutions to problems. And so I want to apologize to Dr. Ross and Mr. Andrews, because what I sounded like I was hearing was that the goals that were set were really kind of state level goals, and so all that's required at the state level is that there's some improvement. And so perhaps they will be having other numbers that, other research that really gets at the issue, but I felt like I couldn't let this issue pass because it is that important. And what I mean is very much like what Dr. Seiler said. There is a really important distinction between an improvement and actual change. And so what I mean by that, I use this example with my students. If you're talking about, for example, trying to lose weight, there is a distinction between weighing 100 pounds and after 6 months you weigh 99 pounds, right? That may be an improvement, but that's not any actual change. versus if you weigh 150 pounds and after 6 months you weigh 100 pounds, right? If that person's goal was to lose weight, that's an actual improvement. So if you're at the stage of setting goals, then I think it behooves you to set actual goals, like real goals. And so if you're wanting to see improvement or actual change, now's the time to do that. I think, and so I appreciated Director Espacet and Director Briggs were kind of getting at that. You're wanting to know what statistically is meaningful. And I think that's really the question to be asking, because if you're just talking about improvement, you're really setting yourselves up not to get any actual answers. And so for Director Franson, I think one of the questions you asked is how do we keep ourselves accountable? And I think the way you do that is by using data appropriately. So it's not just collecting data, but it's actually using it appropriately. And so setting the appropriate standards would be a good way to start. So, thank you.
Thanks, Monique. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to the ESL materials update.
Our tech crew coming to help me out, Shane.
Too many pieces. And then I'm Mary. Sorry. I'm Shaylee Santiago, ESL teacher on special assignment and instructional coach. And I'm here to talk to you tonight about ESL materials. It says standards as the title. That's a mistake. It should be materials. So we did talk about the standards in the spring. I was at a board meeting to inform you about those. The elementary ESL teachers have been working on going through our essential standards based on the ELPA 21 standards that were recently adopted by the state per guidelines from the federal government. And so part of that work has been looking at the 10 standards, and we chose standards 1, 2, and 3 as our essential standards, and the teachers have been working on developing common formative assessments. And then this school year, we're on the curriculum cycle, and so it makes sense that given the change in these standards, there's quite a shift from what we've had previously. It's time to look at materials that would more closely align to the new standards. And so in the spring, we worked to review over approximately a dozen different sets of materials. And in May, the elementary teachers met, and they selected 2 different sets of materials that we would pilot this coming school year. The 2 materials that we selected are National Geographic Reach and Benchmark Education. They have a variety of text sets that we'll be using. One note here that's relevant when we're talking about curricular materials for ESL. ESL is different from a lot of other curriculum areas because we don't have just one specific content that we're looking at. So unlike science, they just have science that they're focused on. For ESL, we think in terms of the 4 language domains of listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And then as well, our standards align to the content. So we're looking at the core and thinking about how can we help our students with the language of math, with the language of science, social studies, and then language arts. And of course, there's a close alignment with language arts anyway. So our materials need to address both sides, content and language that goes along with those different content areas. And so the materials that we've selected to pilot National Geographic Reach is specific for ESL students. It does align with their Reach into Phonics program, and they also have a lot of supplementary materials that we could choose to add as well if we so desired. Benchmark Education, the text sets allow us to choose different topics. So we'll be choosing some that connect with science, with social studies, different areas like that. And so that mathematics, they have some really good ones about math as well. So that's part of the reason why those 2 sets of materials were selected. We did use a rubric to help us determine which ones to choose, and we will use that same rubric when we come back to kind of review the process next spring. So a little bit about our process. With some staffing changes that happened recently, we actually have 4.5 FTE teachers at the elementary. So in essence, 5 different people. And we're dividing them into 2 groups. One of those teachers is at 2 buildings. He'll be at Sawyer and then Meeker, and so he gets counted double. So my groups are basically 3, so 3 and 3. So one group will start with the REACH materials in the fall semester, and then they'll do benchmark education, and the other group will start with benchmark and then go to REACH. And so it allows us to get both what's happening in the fall semester versus the spring semester, because there are differences in terms of starting school in the fall and in the spring, having the standardized testing that happens, that impacts the instructional time. So we're able to balance out that way. It also allows us to have to get fewer sets of materials for the pilot, so it just makes it a little more feasible on that end. Another step in this process is that the reps from the publishers will be providing some training for our teachers in the fall, and then as instructional coach, I'll be working closely with them as well. And then I already alluded to data collection. In this process, our ESL teachers will be completing surveys about how they think the materials are working. That we also will do the same rubric, go back and score that at the end of each rotation. And we will have administrators coming in to do observations of the pilot materials in use. And they'll be completing a survey as well. And I kind of stick myself in that part. As the coach, I will also complete a survey. And then we also have a piece for community feedback. So at parent-teacher conferences in the fall, we'll have materials available at the buildings, and then we're looking at adding some other components to that as well. And then come May next spring, we hope to bring the board a final recommendation for materials which would be purchased and put into place then in the fall of 2018. Any questions for me about this process or what we're doing?
So the word pilot arouses just a couple of questions.
Sure.
So we're basically not going to continue with the current curriculum we've been using, and now we're just testing these 2.
The way we've set it up with the teachers is that we're asking them to use the pilot material 50% or more of their instructional time. Our population is quite vast in terms of we have students who come speaking almost no English, clear up to students who are what we would describe as nearing proficiency. So that's a wide range, not to mention K through 5, so we're talking 6th grade levels. So we realized that the pilot materials that we're getting, we're focusing on specific grade levels at different buildings, so we're not giving them enough to do all their classes in the new materials. Plus, that would be a huge change for them to, we come back in fall, you have a day of training, a few days of planning, and then you jump into everything you're teaching is brand new to you. So rather than do that, we've said at least 50% of your time should be using the new materials.
And the way this works, there's not really many elect-out provisions for families that would just say, hey, I don't want to be part of this because that wouldn't really work with the staffing model that we have to deliver this, right?
I suppose there could be an opportunity at a particular grade level. It depends on how the individual teacher's schedule is set up, because some of our teachers are pulling, like, say, kindergarten and 1st graders at the same time, or maybe 2nd and 3rd graders together. So
it's completely different than the K2 literacy pilot that we did this last year in the way in which it works.
Right, and ESL is just a different model of delivery. We don't see the students, but typically 30 to maybe 60 minutes if they're a newcomer in a given day. So we're just a small part of their day. And we're talking about a small number of teachers relative to what the pilot this last year was.
So why not just pick one? As compared to go through this process, why don't you put your heads together and say, let's just do this?
I think the reality is when you look at the materials that publishers send for a pilot, there's all kinds of bells and whistles, and compared to what we have had in ESL, and what I showed them, even just when we were reviewing materials, I mean, it was like stars in their eyes, just overwhelmed. So I think when you look at something, you get a very different perspective than when you take it back to your classroom and start using it. And from the little bit that I was involved in the pilot this last year, I know that was happening. You know, we meet with the publisher reps and, oh, this is going to be really cool. It's going to do this and this and that. And then you'd go see what was happening in the classroom, and it wasn't necessarily like you thought it was going to be from what you heard from the publishers and what you were reading about it. So I feel like it's important that we get a chance to try it on and see if it is a good fit. And also that will help us to be able to compare between the two sets of materials.
The population of students you serve is somewhat impacted by Iowa State, so how much are you impacted by, how much does your collection of students differ from fall semester to spring? And if there is a large difference, how will you manage that with this pilot?
Typically, I believe we have more students in the spring. We do tend to lose some then too, like I know a lot of times late January, early February, it's like a revolving door some days. But generally our spring numbers are higher than they are in the fall. So, I mean, we know that going into it. That's one reason why we're balancing out by semester. So reach isn't just in the fall. For example, we've got it at a couple buildings in the fall and a couple buildings in the spring to try to account for some of those differences that occur between the two semesters.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Should.
Any comments or questions? It's not reflected on the agenda, but any questions or comments from the public? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move on to the committee reports. There is no exhibit. Do any of the committees have a verbal report tonight?
Not from an official board committee, but we have conducted 2 public tours and open houses at Ames High School that Jerry has done a marvelous job with, and most of it was led by Dwayne Reeves. And we have 1 more public tour. I think we've reached maybe, Jerry, 60, maybe 65 people at this point. A little bit lower than what we had been anticipating because of the summer, I'm certain. We have 1 more public tour scheduled for this Wednesday, which is July 19th at 6:30 at Ames High School. And the community committee has met twice. The next one is at 6:30 on July 27th here. Now the public tours I think have been very helpful for me. For the most part, I'm feeling a lot of support for this, but still at the same time, as we met with the committee, community committee the other night, they said a lot of people that they have talked to in the public are still unaware. So you'll notice in the back of the room, our new PR person is Eric Smith, is now on duty, and he is a master. He is going to really try to push some information out by using Facebook. Hopefully we can get that to go out a little bit viral. We have members of the committee who have said, if Eric can send it to me, we can push it on from there and try and get the word out. We're doing other things on Twitter to try and get that information out, but we'll just keep pushing at it and see where we're going to end up with it. But it's been a lot of fun, and I think Jerry's done a great job with the interview. We've gotten a lot of comments and compliments on not the interview, but with the tour. We haven't lost any down in the Fine Arts building or Fine Arts wing, but they did find a freshman from 19 what? Maybe that wasn't the same one, but it's been real exciting in there. So.
Thank you for that update. Questions or comments? All right, we'll move to the public forum. Gail, I have you signed up.
Gail Seiler. I just wanted to make a comment on one of the items that's in the next section, item I under, I think it's 11I under contracts, the professional development that's planned. And I'm very happy to see that agreement has been reached with Dr. Spikes and Dr. Swalwell to carry out that professional development. They're colleagues of mine, and I knew they'll do a great job. I understand that change, particularly of this type, takes time. But I think it's also important to remember that in the meantime, students' lives are being impacted and their learning is at stake. And so I just want to ask you to recognize other actions that perhaps can and should be taken while the professional development is going on over the next year. Some of these we've mentioned and suggested in various meetings and other communications and conversations with you, but I just want to get them on the record once more, so to speak. I already mentioned the idea of working with teachers around developing culturally relevant pedagogical practices in particular content areas like math or science. But I also ask you not to forget about the racial and ethnic disparities that exist in areas other than achievement. For example, the need to look into discipline policies to understand what's going on there that's resulting in the kinds of disparities we're seeing there. Policies and practices related to admission into advanced programs, courses, tracks, that sort of thing, because it's another area where we're seeing big racial and ethnic disparities. We talked about listening sessions. I encourage you to still continue with that idea, separate from professional development, because I think there's a lot to be learned from the stakeholders, from community members and students at this time. And in one of our meetings, I know we talked about school climate surveys and the need to not just do those, but to disaggregate that data according to racial groups, to find out what the experiences are for the particular groups within the school. So basically, I just ask that you, we're happy to see that the professional development is going to begin, the cultural competency professional development, but to please not see it as a cure-all, and to not just think, okay, we're done, that's going to be happening, but to remember that there are more immediate actions that can also be taken, and that the group that I represent, Ames Youth and School Action Team, is eager and willing to collaborate with you on any of those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. We will move to consent items.
Move approval of the consent items as presented.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, seconded by Briggs.
We have the minutes from the meeting held on actually June 5, 12, 19, and 29 from Ms. Chris. Also claims and payroll for May and June of 2017. The personnel report, well, you will see the appointment of Eric Smith to our Director of School Community and Media Relations position. And I'm really excited to have Eric here. You'll notice him back there sitting next to our new principal at Northwood School, Kristen Barber, whom you approved last week. So they're all part of that personnel report. We have a very large list of gifts to the district tonight, including several that were given to the district in an effort to address our negative lunch balances. $100 from Brian and Monique Benkin, cash in the amount of $110 from the Meadow Glen neighborhood, $50 from Dennis and Jolene Frett, $25 from James Strand, $116.15 from the Converse family, and for the board information, there was a $1,000 gift from the School Lunch Fairy LLC, which is out of Florida, who happened to hear about us and offered $1,000 to help us address our negative lunch balance. There are three donations, I should say, to Sawyer School, including the Sawyer PTO for $7,264.17, $300 from Dr. and Mrs. Charles Mulford to the Sawyer Art Program, and the Integrated Services Program at Sawyer School from Dr. Gary Fye for books about various artists. There is also a number of gifts that were given to the district in support of the 2017 Science Olympiad team. $50 from the Blue Sky Orthodontics, $100 from Karen Stewart, $100 from Peter O'Rozum and Patricia Cotter, $200 from Joseph and Deborah Harbison, $200 from Warren and Mayo Poig, $200 from the Saltec Systems, $500 from the ISU Sand Cult Club, and $500 from McFarland Clinic, again all towards the Science Olympiad team. $100 was also given towards the demo of the old Edwards building by Neil and Tracy Molitor, and another $1,000 towards the demo of the old Edwards building from Stacy Smith. As mentioned previously, there is a large number of contracts here. Most of these are renewals, including the athletic training, mental health services agreement with LSI, which is not a renewal, it's a new one as part of our budget for next year. I think it should be pointed out in I, the cultural competency professional development agreements with Dr. Ross and Dr. Daniel Spikes. The agreement at Adventureland Inn for our administrative retreat, which is actually on August 2, and continuous enrollment. I'm not certain, but I think Dr. Ross, did you have some comments you wanted to make relative to the agreement with Dr. Spikes?
Just some clarification in case the board has any questions, but overall that's a $35,000 budget which will come out of general funds, and the goals that we set in planning with Dr. Spikes when we started our planning process with him in January include to set expectations for our staff for cultural shift, which will be partly measured through some research by Dr. Spikes and Dr. Swalwell, and to move beyond student achievement and validate student identities. So in year one, the focus will be on getting district leaders and those directly involved with professional development at the building level trained in the cultural competency. This training will be based on the ISU courses taught by Drs. Spike and Swalwell. On August 14th and 15th, all central office administrators and teachers on special assignment will receive initial training with Dr. Spikes on the topic of introduction of critical consciousness and equity. After the board election in September, the Ames Board of Directors will receive similar training with Dr. Spikes. Beginning in September, building principals will meet with Dr. Spikes on the second Thursday of each month from 8 to 10 in the morning to learn about Critical Consciousness Building 101. From 10 to noon on the second Thursday of the month, assistant principals and instructional coaches will meet with Dr. Swalwell to cover similar learnings. The work will include outlining participants' concerns, questions, and comfort levels with topics related to critical consciousness as the foundation for the rest of the year. And then Dr. Swalwell and Dr. Spikes will plan based on what they receive from those initial meetings with the teams. Training principals, assistant principals, and instructional coaches sets the foundation for building level trainings in year two. In addition, there will be a research component to help us answer the question, what is the impact of efforts to increase district-level critical consciousness? The research component will include community forums or focus groups, as well as student and staff forums and focus groups during the 17-18 school year. In planning conversations with Dr. Spikes, there are preliminary plans to have an initial community meeting one evening in September, and the date is not yet determined. These data will help evaluate the shift in the cultural competency of the staff from baseline forward. We will also use our work to reflect on our policy work, which is why the board is part of the training in September in year one. So those are the pieces that we have in place. Details are still forthcoming simply because Dr. Spikes and Dr. Swalwell will be doing some work with us to anticipate what next needs to come next. And so that's what we're waiting for in order. Just was making sure it wasn't my phone going off. So those are the pieces that really will be the foundation for planning for the rest of the year. And then from there, the building principals and then their instructional coaches and assistant principals will be key in getting it back to the building and classroom levels. The C&I staff will be a support resource for them, but the real training will happen at the building level, and that will be part of what you'll hear about next year is what's happening at the building and classroom level on our Wednesdays, because that will be the key delivery component of the classroom and building level trainings.
Thank you for that update. All right, we will go ahead and vote to approve the consent items. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
opposed, say nay. Passes 6-0. Moving on to our action items. The first item is the municipal pool joint use agreement extension. Dr. Taylor, and we've got Steve Schenker and Keith Abraham here to provide some information from the city.
At our last meeting, there was a discussion relative to an amendment to our current municipal pool joint use agreement, which would be an extension for a couple of years. It was presented by Mr. Schenker from the city to the district. At that meeting or our last meeting where we started that discussion, there was also an amendment to the amendment calling for shared revenues that was submitted by Dr. Rosser. In the midst of that discussion, there was a request for information from the city relative to the funds provided or the revenue provided to the city by the Ames Cyclones Aquatics Club. And as a result, Mr. Schenker and Keith Abraham from Park and Rec are here. They requested permission to come to the board tonight and address the board relative to those figures. They felt it would be very beneficial if they could explain them to the board as opposed to just handing them out. So, Steve and Keith, welcome tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us again, and we just wanted to take this opportunity to go through the information that we're just handing out to you, try to answer the questions that you had at the last meeting that we were at. So there was some confusion regarding how much revenue we actually get from the Ames Cyclone Aquatics Club, and a couple things, roughly $35,000 to $40,000 was thrown out, $25,000 to $30,000. So what we want to do is we went back and we did, talk to ACAC. We got information from them regarding their members, and we kind of broke it down into two sections. One is the school year, which is kind of the fall, winter, spring, which they generally practice at municipal pool. And then the second one is the summer. So as you can see from the information that they gave us, 144 swimmers during the school year and 133 swimmers, during the summertime. Those are the numbers. What we did then is we took a look at those numbers and we went back and we looked at those names and saw what types of passes, did they purchase. Whether it was a family pass, whether it was an individual pass, and so on. We did that for each of the swimmers. Now what we did is we took that data and we interpreted it two different ways. So the first interpretation, what we did is if a family, or say let's start with an individual, if they bought an individual pass for $70, $71, whatever it might be, we put all of that dollars, towards the fees from ACAC. In this interpretation, what we also did is if they bought a family pass, and say they paid $221 for that family pass, we put all $221, to the fees that came from ACAC. And when we did that, you can see that the dollar amount that we would have received, and this is for the fall winter of 16-17 and the summer of 2017, we would have received just under $23,000. In the second interpretation, what we did is we didn't give credit for the entire family pass to ACAC. So in an example, if a family bought a pass for $221, they have 4 members in their family and only 2 of them are ACAC swimmers, what we did is we then applied just half of that family pass to the fees that generated from ACAC. So when we did that, then the total amount that we received from ACAC is $14,668. So, which is a lot less than the $22,000. Now, it's probably a more accurate number because with family members, when they buy a family pass, the family members are also using, it could be the municipal pool in the wintertime or more likely Furman Aquatic Center in the summertime. And just for reference, during the school year, of those 144 members, there were 13 family passes purchased for the school year. For the summer, that number rises to 45. So again, Furman Aquatic Center, it's great and outdoors, a lot more to offer than municipal pool. So obviously there are a lot more families that purchase the family passes Thus, we kind of assume that most of those families are going and using the pool. And not only the families, but the ACAC swimmers can also be using the Furman Aquatic Center outside of ACAC swim hours. So that number you could make the argument that that number is still a little bit high because, the swimmers are also utilizing the facility during open swim times. So this is just wanted to, I think this is what you wanted to receive. So do you have any questions on the information that we provided here?
Did you happen to bring the revenue and expense sheet that you used at the last presentation?
Yeah, I do have it here.
Yeah, could you put it up so everybody can see it? And so where does the new figure plug in, Mr. Shanker?
Pardon me?
Where does the new figure plug in, whether it's 22 or 14? Where does that plug in this revenue and expense?
The numbers don't change at all. It's the numbers, it's still all the revenue, whether we got a family pass or an individual pass, is all in the same numbers that we gave you at the last meeting. Those numbers don't change. It's just how we interpret how much money actually from ACAC is what we're getting. So that's how we did the different interpretation. We still get the revenue whether they buy a family pass or an individual pass. That's all the same. So those numbers don't change. It's just how we interpret what we get from ACAC. That's the difference in interpretation 1, interpretation 2.
Passes, let's say.
So under revenues where it says season passes winter,
Right.
that would correlate with the fall winter information on your previous sheet. The summer information is not on here because that is Furman and we are just talking about municipal.
Correct. Now the numbers will generally not match because we're just on what we just handed out tonight is just associated with ACAC swimmers. It doesn't take into account somebody an adult for lap swimming or for open swim or whatever else they might want to do up at
It's
the
interesting.
municipal pool.
So I would argue that, or some people could argue, I wouldn't argue, some people would argue again that even the interpretation number 2 is probably very conservative in giving credit to the ACAC because again, you could have a summer pass and you could use it for recreational purposes, but we divided it per capita by the ACA swimmer and credited all, in our analysis, credited all to the ACAC and not to the recreation swimming. Also, it was kind of interesting, I asked Keith to go back and look at the number of hours that ACAC uses at the pool. I don't have the exact figures there, but whether you use the $22,000 or the $14,000, the average cost per hour is only anywhere from $18 at the high end to $13 in the low end per hour. That would be something I would normally see if you wanted to rent a gymnasium, but not if you rent something like a swimming pool or an ice arena, higher cost. Not only have air conditioning, you've got the cost of all the chemicals and the mechanical system in there. So all I'm saying is I think it's a very reasonable cost to ACAC. I think everybody's happy with that. We're not trying to raise the cost, but right now and for the past 50 years, we've, as a group, decided we would pay for some of the long-standing and fixed costs like chemicals and electricity and all, and we didn't charge that back to the users in any of the fees. They pay separately for the programs they use, right? Any change in that philosophy would cause us to drastically have to go back and increase the fees for everybody.
Right, and that's kind of what I was getting to regarding looking a little deeper into these numbers. So thank you, first of all, for giving us a little more of a breakdown of what your costs that you showed as revenues in here. Not cost, but revenues in here specifically for the club, because one of the things that's different from the programs that the city offers for other park and rec programs like, swimming lessons and other things is that you have costs related to that. You have to hire lifeguards, you have to hire the instructors, you have to hire, but that's one thing that's different from the club.
Right.
You have no costs related to when the club uses the pool. They there's no requirement for you or by them to provide lifeguards. The coaches for the club are certified lifeguards, and under USA Swimming regulations and requirements, they have to be. And they provide that service basically. So there's no cost, but you collect the revenue. Okay, and that was the point that I was really getting at. I completely agree with you that if we were to break out the programs that the city offers at the municipal pool, you have costs related to those, and you should cover those costs. But I do think that in the course of looking at your budgets, you probably do subsidize on the city side some of those programs with city dollars. And because you have to, otherwise you wouldn't be able to offer those programs. And the point that I made 2 meetings ago was that the arrangement that we've had for many years is unfair to the district in that we're splitting, you know, we're both paying the operating costs of the municipal pool. You're keeping all of the revenue, regardless of whether you have costs related to the programs that are in it, but we don't. So I think maybe the middle ground that we could get at here is possibly if we could take, you know, looking at that revenue and realize the programs that you're doing, you do have costs. That makes sense. But the programs that you don't have costs related to, i.e. ACAC, that's the revenue that we should share, and it should come back or be split in half so that we fairly are gaining from that program. Because let's face it, without the high school swim program, there wouldn't be a swim club that feeds the high school program. So, and again, you as the city don't have any expenses related to the club using the
But unfortunately,
facility.
that's a long-standing history, and we built that into our base. So if you make that change, that will certainly benefit you. It will not benefit the city. And maybe we need to do a whole restructuring of the cost to ACAC, because it's not, we'll have to increase their fees to cover, not only giving you 50%, but then capturing money back to us, I think, in another way.
But they don't have any, you don't have any fees related
We have all
related to
the
them.
overhead costs that we're not charging. We should start charging overhead costs.
We share that.
I don't think we haven't had replacement costs for capital and things. We've dug out of our own pockets for that. The user hasn't had to pay for that at all. If you want to change the philosophy, we should really look at changing the philosophy. I don't think you should just look at the one side that benefits you. I mean, I appreciate you wanting to do that, but in fairness, if you
that's
want
my
to
responsibility
if you
as
want
a
to
board
open the
member.
door, I think you got to open the door, and then there'll be a lot of discussions.
Yeah.
If we open that door, it's going to end up costing us more money, Director Rosen.
I don't believe that at all.
I'm afraid, and we didn't look at all your revenue either on the other side. When you charge admission fees, I don't know what your actual costs are for your swimming events and things. And I'm not asking to. You capture all those fees, you could charge whatever you want to.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any fees that we collect for anything for the high. Are you referring to high school meets?
Admissions, yes.
Yeah, I think it's pennies
Well,
on the dollar.
Well, but all those pennies
I
add
think
up.
it covers the cost of the print, the program. But yeah.
Yeah, I would hope you would want to make a change.
It probably goes to the booster club.
Exactly, that's a booster club thing. That doesn't go to the district. So.
Well, it could go to the district.
Pardon me?
You could make the policy that goes to the district.
But we don't.
Well, you're going to make
the city could want that renegotiated.
The revenue goes to the district.
It's still revenue, and the city could want that renegotiated. That money does come to us, so they get their share of it then, or that they get their share from the booster club, whatever the case is.
I think
it's still
we're
revenue.
tail chasing here.
Yes, I do too. Chris, could you provide us some financial perspective?
So the revenue that the swim team generates for meets and so forth, doesn't it all go towards the operation of the pool? It goes into our student activity fund and helps pay for officials, swim uniforms, swimming, if they have any swim equipment that they need, goggles, that type of thing. So none of those revenues, and it barely breaks even, go towards the operation of the pool. I just wanted to make that clear.
So Steve, maybe you can clarify for us, or Keith, under the expenses that I'm looking at, the contractual, the 25,000, I term that as overhead. That's not above in the expenses from the city. Do you see where I'm saying down below?
Overhead, it's cost for our programming.
So it's specifically, so we don't, I'm just trying to think through, are there, as we start to dig even deeper on these expenses, I think my point is we're just going to open a can of worms in terms of chasing all of these different expenses.
Right, because one of the things that, Steve mentioned last time, insurance costs, we don't charge that back to the school district. It's really, we're just looking at the operational expenses as far as the custodial, cleaning supplies, utilities. That's generally what we're sharing right now. But it doesn't include everything that could be put into that mix.
Thank you. So the amendment that we have in front of us, because it was tabled, and Chris, correct me if I'm moving in the wrong direction. So we had a motion to table it, of which we have done. So now we are at the motion to amend it. So Director Rosser added the language, the city and school may establish, charge, and retain reasonable fees and admission charges for the use of the pool and pool building. All of these fees shall be shared equally by the city and school. Specifically, these fees shall be totaled, divided in half, and equally deducted from the shared annual operating costs for the city and school as provided for in Section 6 above to the beginning of Section 8. So to be clear, we are voting on the amendment that was, I'm not seeing who seconded it, just pardon me, the amendment to the amendment, and it was moved by Director Rosser and seconded by Rasmussen. Any additional discussion? All those in favor of the amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed indicate by saying nay.
Nay.
Nay. Amendment is defeated, 1-5. Then we will go to the original amendment to the pool municipal pool joint use agreement. And do you need me to read the entire thing? Everybody have it? Okay, and that was, that original motion was moved by Esposito and seconded by Rosser. Discussion? Proceeding to vote. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Say nay. Original motion passes 6-0. Thank you for coming and answering.
Thanks, guys.
Next action item is disposal of textbooks and instructional materials. I will take a...
Move the board approve the disposal of both textbooks and instructional materials.
Second.
It is moved by Rasmussen, seconded by Briggs. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Passes 6-0. Legislative priorities.
I move the board approve the resolutions as presented for 2018 legislative session.
Second.
Moved by Rasmussen, seconded by Rosser. Discussion. So as you see in the exhibit, we all had, just to give the public an idea of what we are discussing, we identify our legislative priorities for the Iowa Association of School Board Members, our state group, and these are our priorities for them to take for the upcoming legislation session for 2018. What we are moving forward as we have tallied the board, we are looking at SAVE, which is the Secure and Advanced Vision for Education, essentially supporting the repeal of the December 31st, 2029 sunset of the statewide penny sales tax for school infrastructure. The second item that we are putting forward is for supplemental state aid, and it's supporting setting supplemental state aid for fiscal year 18 by the end of January, and then fiscal year 19 for at least 14 months in advance. And the third priority is the school funding policy, and just looking at the funding policy and the formula and identifying some areas that the association identifies could be some improvements. So it has been moved by Rasmussen, second by Rosser. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
I'd just like to point out real quick.
Sorry, thank you.
That from this point, we're voting on this as a board. From this point, these priorities then go to the Iowa Association's School Board Association. And at our meeting this fall, we will, along with all the other school boards, talk about deciding on, as a organization, what are our priorities. And usually it's more than just the top three. Usually they target the top 5 or 6 priorities that they want to really focus on in the legislative session that begins in January. So this is just the beginning of our process, and this is the direct input that that association gets from our local school district.
Yep, we'll send our 3 priorities on to our representatives. So, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Nay? Passes 6-0. Item 16, the annual approval of policy 401.16, retirement of staff.
I move the board.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Dr. Briggs.
I move the board approve policy 401.16, retirement of staff as presented.
Second.
It's been moved by Briggs, seconded by Rasmussen. Discussion?
So just for everyone's feedback and understanding on this policy enables the district to move funds that would pay these staff members out of general fund money into retirement account, or what's the account?
It's actually the management fund.
Management fund. And what that does is that frees up our general fund monies that can then apply towards other things that we need when a staff member who meets the requirement decides that they would like to be done and move on. Where that's significant is the fact that we don't have the ability to just pull money where we want out of our budget. It's certain funds go to certain things. So the ability to move this from one fund into the other, and that one fund being the general fund into management fund, frees up that general fund, which is what goes towards our education and our staff salaries and whatnot.
This one comes back every year just because it has to have the dates on it, and so the date changes are notified on there. And then the only other change you notice is that the applications now go to our Director of Human Resources, which is a nice addition to the district.
The business office was very frustrated with me for about 5 years on this policy because I just couldn't believe it was sustainable. It was adopted in 1993, and it is in fact sustainable because adjusted for inflation, our balance really doesn't change much. So this is a great opportunity to allow educators that want to try a new career and yet are concerned about affordability of their health insurance to keep their health insurance and look for another career. Great opportunity for us to move monies from expense in the general fund to the management fund. I'll be voting yes.
Any other discussion? All right. All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Passes 6-0. New open enrollment applications.
I move the board approve the new open enrollment application as presented.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Rasmussen. Discussion? All those in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay. Passes 6-0. We are on to board and staff items. A couple things that I just wanted to, I know Dr. Taylor will bring a couple of these things to your attention, but from board leadership, on the third page, you will notice that We have scheduled our discussion about the pool, a work session to follow our August 7th meeting. And our desire was just, since we will be here and anticipating that meeting should not be hopefully too terribly long, we will be able to also move forward with some discussions and plans for the pool. We have also added a dialogue with the directors. President Deerdorf and I, in our discussions with Dr. Ross and Dr. Taylor, want to try this. We've been kind of talking about this community dialogue, open forum topic for a while, so we're going to try it before the next meeting, August 7th. And I believe that the time is tentative. We have 6 on there, but we're looking at 5:30, wanting to make sure that we provide enough time, because it is right before a board meeting, to be able to have sufficient time then to be able to move into the meeting at 6:30. So just wanted to call your attention to that. More information to come, but we will, if the community would like to submit questions ahead of time, there is not a requirement because we don't have a quorum, but it would help us to provide the opportunity to do maybe some research. And we will move through there and see how it goes for our first time. I've also asked Dr. Taylor, when it comes to reports from the staff, to discuss some of the information that he included in our board update with our current staff and our numbers there.
I want to ask Carl to come up and be our version of Vanna White. I'm sorry, Carl, maybe that was...
I'll be prettier than Vanna.
This is the time when we begin what's called an EEOC report, and I know Gail had even asked for information relative to the disaggregation of our workforce. And the best time to do that is, and of course the only time that we can really do that is at the end of the current year, for several reasons, but I will get into that in just a second. First of all, as you take a look at this piece of data, which is a breakdown of our district workforce by job classification, it kind of gives you a pretty good idea of pretty much where we're at, and you will notice that the federal qualifications now indicate white, black, Asian, Native American, Native, Hispanic, and 2 races. So that changes, and it changes on a kind of on a almost an annual basis. Because we're at the end of this particular school year, it becomes a starting point for what the EEOC calls the analysis of underrepresented groups within our district. And you will see that there is quite a discrepancy there, which is very true actually across Iowa, which we can get into in just a second. The thing that I think is also important for the board and for everyone else to know is that our minority student population has been surging and now is at 32.2% of our student population identifies itself with a race that is not of Hispanic origin, or is not white, I'm sorry, which is actually, it's a treasure for our district to have that. And I've heard a lot of people, even in the public forums or in the open sessions that we had dealing with the school district, we had that discussion about the the treasure that we do have, because we do have that kind of disparity within our district. So if you keep 32.2%, I can tell you that historically the goal that's been set by the district headed for our EEOC report is generally that we would like to try and match our district workforce with our student population, which would be around 32%. If Carl goes to the very next one, I want to break this down just a little bit for you so that we're actually taking a look at what we have for administrators and what we have for teachers. The interesting thing here is that our minority district workforce in our certified areas is 4.85%, which is a long ways from the 32% from our student population. So this breakdown is as of the end of this particular school year, and that's how the EEOC report starts. When we hire staff, as the board probably knows, we may not ask the question, what race are you, on our applications. We generally do not know what race many people are until they show up for our orientation, in which case, as we do I-9 reports, we then can discover that. That information then will become part of how did we do over last year, and what do we need to do over the next 2 years to, again, address any underrepresented groups. And I want to come back and talk about underrepresentation because it probably doesn't mean what some people may think that it does. Underrepresentation means how do we fare relative to the labor market in each of those categories that Carl actually showed on the very first page. In other words, what percentage of the population in Iowa are teachers of color? The answer is 2%. If you would take a look at that, and then again flip back to the previous page, Carl, we're still underrepresented when it comes into some areas, but for the most part, as we're taking a look at just our teaching staff, I'm not going to include the administrative staff because the number is small and it becomes skewed, we would not be underrepresented. That doesn't mean we're happy with it. It means that we do definitely need to continue efforts to try and increase the minority workforce within the Ames Community School District, which is something that we've tried to do. It's a long process, and a lot of the data that we need to complete the availability of the Iowa workforce will not be available until the fall. That's why the EEOC report is not actually due until next year. But that being said, the available workforce data, once it becomes available, I'm going to work with Ms. Negus, and we're going to work our way through that so that she can take it over eventually and identify the underrepresented groups and all the other things that we really need to do to put that report together. As I said, it's not really a goal that we want to make sure that we're not underrepresented. I can tell you that historically we have been underrepresented in female administrators and in female maintenance employees. We have been underrepresented in minority EAs, secretaries, maintenance employees, and technicians. Still, the goal for our district is to try and do the best that we can, and I think part of that is going to be hopefully a good partnership with Iowa State. In some ways, we can only hire what we're being given, and I know that the minority population in Iowa and the Iowa universities is very low also. So we have tried in the past to advertise in metropolitan areas outside of Iowa, including Kansas City, Minneapolis, Chicago, St. Louis. Did not have much luck. I also found out that Wichita in Kansas has a program whereby the school district pays $1,000 worth of tuition for 4 years for minority students who graduate from the Wichita schools who would want to come back as teachers. Unfortunately, when I investigated that in Iowa, it's illegal in Iowa. We may not use taxpayer money for scholarships. So there are lots of barriers that happen to be out there, but we'll just kind of keep plugging at it. I wanted to explain that to the board and to the public so they can see what we're up to and what we're up against. But we'll continue to work that fight, and as we get additional data on workforce availability, and as we continue to complete the EEOC report down the road, I'll keep the board informed as we go step by step.
Could I, we changed policy not too long ago to say that if 2 board members request something being put on the agenda, it has to be on the agenda within 2 board meetings. I would lean towards waiting just a bit so we get past that August 7th meeting. So it would be somewhere either the September 11th or September 25th, give a little bit more time on that. What would be reasonable to ask you to give a full board presentation on the historical, what steps you have taken, but more importantly, what steps you believe need to be taken or are going to be taken in order to try to fix this. I don't want to make that request tomorrow and force it to be on the August 21st agenda. if somebody else backs me up on it, but I do think that a full presentation might be warranted. What would be reasonable, Dr. Taylor?
The real problem that we have is that we will have orientation for new staff in the middle of August. So we should have some idea of what our upcoming 2017-18 staff looks like when it comes to the racial makeup of our district workforce. That would be a fair report at that time. It's hard for me to predict when the Department of Education and the Department of Labor are going to have the availability numbers that we're really looking for. If I was going to give you the best guess, that would be, if I said the end of September, I'm being very hopeful. So I'm really kind of looking for Ms. Nagus and I to have this done sometime by October so that we can get it wrapped up. By that time, usually what I'm going to come back to you with is the report itself, a recommendation on what the goals will be. But I think the other part is the association that we're starting to develop, and Dr. Ross is starting to develop with Marlene at Iowa State. What can we do in a partnership to try and help secure additional staff for the district?
That's the part that I want to hear.
Yeah, one of the things that's in the board policy, of course, is that, and we do have a rubric that our principals have used in selection, because it's always been the board policy that we want to hire the best for our kids. If we have two candidates that are tied or absolutely even on a rubric, the board policy says the preference will go to the minority applicant. Again, the other problem that we have is when we receive applications, we don't know for sure. But if we know we have kids from Iowa State and have their names and we can get them to apply, that's not illegal, nor is it discriminatory. So there's a lot of things that are associated with it, Tim, but I would like to come back with you with what our current staff is sometime in September, once we have everybody registered. And as soon as I can get the availability percentages on the workforce from the Department of Ed and the Iowa Department of Labor, I'll be happy to come back and talk about it in greater depth. If I can do it by October, that would be great.
Yeah, no, I'll leave it at that then, and rather than putting in the formal request and seeing if somebody, one of the other board members backs me up to force it on the agenda, that you're just going to bring that forward as soon as you can.
There was another piece of information. I think when I mentioned the 2% minority, that was from the 2015-16 school year. So you can see that even the Department of Ed does not have the 16-17 figures up yet. Thank you, Carl, very much. The state average is 2.3% on minority, by the way. So what we're really looking for is when they can get that information together and get it in our hands, and they know that EEOC reports are coming around the corner, so I would like to think that the Department of Ed and the Bureau of Information Analysis will help get that information out to us quicker.
I think the only thing I'd add to it is that, you know, I mean, and the statistics have been shared with us from, as the conversation has proceeded this year. I don't know that everybody on the board has seen them, all the information that's been shared via email, but you know, this is an important topic because all the research shows that minority students perform better when they have minority teachers available to them at some point in their career, and we're doing a disservice to students if we don't take steps to advance this.
Dr. Taylor, I'm pleased to finally see some of these numbers. I look forward to the work that you're going to be doing with Ms. Nagus over the next few months to put together a plan. I do ask that it be brought to the diversity committee before it comes to the board so that we can dig a little more deeper into some of the ways of recruitment that have been proven in other districts, that even are successful right here in our own community at ISU to address some of these issues. So again, I'm pleased to finally see some of these numbers. I look forward to reading them into them a little bit more, and look forward to our discussions at the committee meeting. Hopefully, late September works for me. Early October is fine, but the sooner, definitely the better.
Any other comments from the board?
I have one question for you, Elisa, or maybe Tim. So related to the dialogue with directors, will that will that be a posted meeting so, so we could have a quorum represented, or should we not have a quorum represented because it's a little more informal and just deal with it that way?
Thank you for asking for that clarifying question. Our plan is that it will just be directors, just Luke and I,
Okay.
the president, vice president, and then Dr. Ross and Dr. Taylor. So we do not have those questions in terms of quorum. We will still obviously advertise it, and I'm sure Eric will get the nod to push that out so the community members are aware of it, but we are not required by any of our open meeting policies to post it, but yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Carl.
Anything else from the board members? Any items from the staff?
Very quickly, there was my gift to the board, which is the new 2017 through 2019 master contract with the teachers, and I know we have some board candidates that are here. I'd be happy to get those to you as soon as you'd like to have those. It's better than Sominex if you begin to read it. I also did present to the board some enrollment information from June 1 of 2017, where our district elementary enrollment was 1934. The information from July 13 is 1974, which is pretty much an increase of roughly 40 students. Barb Peterson's been working very hard on that. I want to put a lot of reliability into that, but I always worry about the dip that's going to happen from those that were graduate students' children who the lease runs out the 1st of August and they leave without letting us know. So we'll see where it's at. And I always like to be very encouraged about that, but I always am also on guard a little bit about it. Again, I wanted to welcome Eric on as part of our administrative team. There are a couple dates for the board to keep in mind. First of all, the August 21st is our breakfast and kickoff for all staff, which happens to fall on a Monday. The board members are invited to attend, and one of the things in the past is there's always been a thrill for the board members to actually help serve breakfast to the staff as they come through. It begins at 7:30 at Ames Middle School. Keeping that in mind, school will begin almost 1 month from today. It's actually August 23rd, which falls on a Wednesday. So the summer has gone very, very fast, I think, for most everyone. A couple other things that I would mention very quickly coming up on future agendas. We'll be trying to pick up a little bit more on new teacher orientation, the staff workshop days, and the first day of classes, and keeping the board updated on our preparation to be ready. Our retreat is on August 2. It begins on August 1 here, and on August 2 we actually get out of the district and away from the phones. What we found out is that Miss Darcy is very popular about this time of year, and it's very difficult to have a meaningful meeting when she's being drug out by the heels in some cases for meetings and everybody else. So there are many other members of our administrative team. It's an opportunity for us to get away and get off the grid so that we can talk about all the things that we need to do. And it's been very, very beneficial over the future. So we'll have some research reports, a technology update, an exchange student report, and also a couple other things for surprises for August as we get into August 7 in that particular board meeting. Welcome Anthony Jones to the administrative table over there for the first time as our new Director of Student Services. Thanks. That's what I've got.
Maybe the other thing, the high school committee report, maybe you mentioned it, but we're looking at August 21st board meeting that we will be moving that. The
That is correct.
community group will be ready to present at that time.
Perhaps. We're hoping.
We're crossing our fingers,
Yeah.
so, yes. Anything else for the good of the order? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Rosser, second by Rasmussen. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Passes 6-0. Adjourn. Thank you.